So welcome everyone. This is our final faculty corner of 2020. It's hard to believe that we're already here. We're very happy that all of you have decided to join us on this chilly and sunny day. Today, we are having a discussion about what it is like to be a faculty both at the University of Michigan, an R1 public institution, and at a HBCU, or historically Black college or university. Today, our guest speakers are Dr. Kevin Jones and Dr. Marina Silveira. They are going to be driving this conversation. If you have questions, please feel free to unmute and ask or put them in the chat. We want this to be a welcoming and learning environment. So with that, I will hand things over to Marina, who will be our guest moderator.
Thank you, Maggie, and thank you, Kevin, for joining us today, and thank you, everyone, for joining to this meeting. And I'm very excited about it. So as Meg said, please feel free to unmute yourself or send questions on the chat as you prefer. So I'd like to start to ask Kevin to introduce himself. And if you could please talk a little bit about your past training that has led you to your career as a professor and has led you to the University of Michigan.
Okay, well, first off, thank you so much for having me. It's nice to always get a chance to speak to postdocs, so I appreciate the opportunity. So, as you mentioned, prior to coming to the University of Michigan, I was an assistant professor in biology at Howard University. My career path is quite different than a traditional career path. I actually spent the majority of my career as an instructor. I spent most of my career teaching, and then sort of came back to doing research later in my career. So after I graduated with my PhD, I did a brief postdoc in Madrid, Spain, to do neuropharmacology in the Ramon y Cajal Institute. And that was a really life-changing experience. It was my first time living outside of the United States, and it had a number of influences on my life, not the least of which I ended up meeting my spouse over there. When I came back to the United States, I really, because of some experiences that I had, I really had always enjoyed teaching. And so I really had focused on establishing myself as an instructor, learning how to teach, and I've taught at institutions from a variety of levels, all the way from private, small liberal arts, wealthy liberal arts colleges to public community colleges and everything in between, private medical schools, public medical schools. And so after that, my wife had a change in her career trajectory, and she had an opportunity to work with former President Barack Obama. And so at the time, I was a faculty member at a medical school where I was an instructor. I was in a position as an instructor, and this school had very little research. And what I had realized after being so away from the bench for several years is, my God, I missed it. I really missed it so much. And so at this school, I was actually, because they had very little research activity, I was actually volunteering with another nearby university, driving an hour and a half, sometimes in traffic. We were living in Los Angeles at the time. And so when my wife got this opportunity, at the time, she wasn't sure if she was going to take it, but I said, this is an incredible opportunity for you. I'm not terribly thrilled about being just a lecturer. I really want to bring research back into my career. And so at that point, I decided to do something which was really, it was a gamble for me at this point in my career. I decided to leave a tenure track lecturing position, a tenure track position, to go and do a second postdoc. And it was the best decision I ever made. And so I left that university. My wife moved to Washington, D.C. to work with the Obama administration. And I was able to arrange an opportunity to do a second postdoc in Washington, D.C. and it was phenomenal. Not only was it great to be back in the lab and to be back to sharpen my research skills, learn some newer techniques. It was the first opportunity. It was the first time in my career where I also gained a mentor. Right, I'd had a scientific PhD advisor, but I never had a mentor, and so I gained mentorship, and then was able to sort of navigate through the rest of my career. And if there's one piece of advice, is find you a good mentor, or as many mentors as you think you need. You need a career mentor. You need not just a scientific mentor, but a career mentor. And that's what I found during my second postdoc. And so my PI, when I was a postdoc, my PI left very abruptly, left. Um, and so I had about 6 months to sort of decide what I was going to do. During that time, there was a job announcement for so my postdoc was in neurophysiology. This is where I learned to do patch clamp electrophysiology and slice electrophysiology and culture neurons. And it was a very, it was a physiology postdoc. So a job announcement had come out, and one of my colleagues alerted to me. She said, "Hey, there's a job I think that you should take a look at." At the time, I wasn't necessarily interested in taking a faculty position. I had just been awarded a postdoctoral fellowship, so I had funding for about the next 4 years. And I loved being at the bench. I loved being a postdoc. But my family had started to expand at that point. This was 3 years into the postdoc. We had kids, and the one thing that really stinks about a postdoc, or the only thing I think that really stinks about the postdoc, is the salary. Like it's so tight to try to support a family on a postdoc salary. So let me be more brief. I saw this job announcement, and it looked like they had written it for me. They were looking for someone who was a neurophysiology background. They wanted someone to teach. They wanted someone to teach animal physiology, which I had taught. They wanted someone to teach pharmacology, which I had taught for many years. They wanted someone to start a basic sort of physiology, a lab-based neurophysiology course. And so without giving it too much thought, I applied. And it turns out the school was literally across the street from where I was doing my postdoc. It was Howard University. And so on the day of my interview, I literally took off my lab coat, put on a tie, walked across the street to the interview. Wanted it because of the salary, but really fearful of missing the bench. And so long story short, I was offered the position and just fell in love with the institution. It was a really, working with the students, being a part of the history of that university. Not a lot of people are familiar with Howard University, but if you're aware of historically Black colleges and universities, Howard is usually the one that comes to mind really, most prominently. Kamala Harris is an alumni of the vice president-elect. Kamala Harris is an alumni of Howard University. So it's a really prestigious kind of place. So I was happy to be there and happy to be a part of it. And it's where I really refined my teaching skills. I was in the undergraduate college. I was in the biology department. And so in the biology department, you usually have either 3-3 or a 4-3. So you either have 3 classes in the fall, you have to teach 3 classes in the spring, or sometimes a 4 class in the fall, 3 classes in the spring. So it's a teaching intensive place. And so that was the place where I really got to refine my teaching skills. And I was able to start a small laboratory. But what happened was that my research really started to pick up, and that's how I ended up becoming a faculty at the University of Michigan. I came to a point in my career where I was looking at, I'm a pharmacologist by my formal training is in pharmacology. I moonlight as a neuroscientist, but I'm a pharmacologist. And so one of the things that the focus of my research is trying to understand glutamatergic signaling in the brain, how it's disrupted. And there are several diseases that we're interested in. I'm very, very fascinated with the disease of schizophrenia. And so, the central focus of my lab is, can we understand how glutamate signaling is disrupted in schizophrenia? And can we identify new drugs to treat this disease? So that's something that has always been my passion, and that's something that you absolutely can only do at a handful of universities in the country. And the University of Michigan is one of them. Like, our drug discovery our legacy of doing drug discovery is, among the best in the nation. And so when I had an opportunity to come here, we went for it. And so we uprooted the family and relocated here to Ann Arbor. And I've been here for about 5 years now. So I think that answers your question.
Yeah, that's really nice. It's a really impressive career trajectory.
Okay.
So Kevin, we receive a lot of questions specifically about HBCUs. But I think before we jump into the questions, would be interesting if you could talk a little bit about what an HBCU is and what are the benefits and strengths of HBCUs.
Sure. So historically Black colleges and universities, there was a time in this country. So, right after the Civil War, after, African slaves were freed, the country had a responsibility to educate, to allow slaves to get education, right? I mean, they had never been allowed to actually receive education, and it was forbidden for Black Americans to go to colleges and universities. So as a solution to that, they started to develop universities where they would permit descendants of slaves to go to get education. And so from their inception, it was the only opportunity for higher education for slaves. And in fact, most of the universities that are now universities today, they actually started off, being either teachers' colleges, because that was the primary thing, that was the primary problem they were trying to solve. Like, we need to create teachers to be able to teach the sons and daughters of these freedmen and freedwomen. So that was the primary impetus of developing historically Black colleges and universities. Over time, they've started to evolve, but that was the impetus. So, and there were at one point, I think there was about 135 or 140 at one point. That number has dwindled. Many of them have closed, but I believe there's still over about 100 historically Black colleges and universities. So then the next thing they started to do was that then you started to see the professional schools emerge. So then you started to have, because, where was the Black community going to get their doctors or their lawyers? They couldn't go to, Cornell or Yale. So then you started to see the medical schools emerge where they would train Black doctors and dentists and lawyers and so forth. And then more recently, you started to see them expand, and I guess they've always had basic science departments, because there's a long history of basic scientists that have come out of places like Howard. But that's in large part, that's a relatively newer wrinkle of their story. In the very beginning, they were focused on creating teachers, doctors, lawyers, right? And in a lot of vocational schools. And so the interesting thing about them is that there are, like I said, over 100, I think maybe 110 or something, but they're very, very different. They have very, very different personalities and missions and goals. And so to try to describe what an HBCU like, you have to be a bit more specific, because there's very different experience between someplace like Spelman College, which is a small all-women's HBCU in Atlanta, Georgia, versus Florida A&M University, which is a huge land-grant school in Florida. So, and then there's private and public as well, difference between private and public schools as well. Nowadays, their principal focus is mostly it's for African-American families where they will send their kids to go to school, not exclusively. When I taught at Howard, I had one of my favorite students was actually a student from Vietnam. My goodness, it makes me laugh just thinking about her. But so now their student body is much more global, as everything else is in the country. But still, their core focus is, educating young Black men and women, developing Black men and women to go out and be leaders in, every sort of field of human endeavor. That's kind of the broad mission of the schools. And they achieve that to more or lesser degrees. It really, really depends on the institution. You can see, just like any other school, right? Different levels of success.
Right. And following this line of the different missions and goals, what was the mission and goals of the institution that you worked at? And also, what would be the cultural difference? So, for
Mm.
example, lab cultural difference versus classroom cultural difference between the university, the HBCU in Howard and the University of Michigan. Do you have any
Yeah,
comment
yeah,
on
that's
that?
that's that's a really good question. That's a really good question. So, Howard is, one of the premier, if not the premier, HBCU. So it has a very sort of broad mission, which is like, I guess I would say it's, to create the best and brightest among all aspects of, industry and, in the United States. It's a very broad, aspirational kind of goal. Um, they, as a whole, for example, in sciences, most most African Americans that have a PhD got their undergraduate training at historically Black colleges, universities. That's still the case today. Um, so it's a large place where a lot of Black students go to get educated right out of high school. It's still a common choice. Lots of differences. So some of the differences, like if I'm going to compare being a faculty at Howard to being a faculty at Michigan, there's a couple of things we have to take into consideration with that. So one, now I'm in the medical school at the University of Michigan. So I'm sure that there are probably some differences between being in a medical school versus being in a undergraduate college. That was one of the distinctions of my two positions. And then on top of that, there's the differences between being at an HBCU and a predominantly white university. So one of the biggest differences probably about being in the classroom and the labs is that they were smaller, right? So when I taught at Howard, my typical class size was anywhere from 30 to 30, 35 was kind of on the high side. Most of my classes, I usually would have about 25 students to, usually around 30 was typical, right? And so that allows for faculty to engage with students on a different level than when you're teaching a class that has, 300 students or 400 students. It was rare that there were in the biology department, the only classes that had sections would be the introductory classes. Once you got to like junior level classes, there was typically just one section of a course. Maybe genetics was the other class. But that was a sophomore course. So that was the one thing. The smaller, more personal, very very sort of more intimate teaching environment, right? That's probably just a function of its size. I've taught at other places where they had very small student to teacher ratios as well, and that was a function of its size. The students come mostly from America, but all across the country. And I'd say probably maybe at Howard, I guess probably 85% are of African descent, either African American or they get a lot of international students from the continent of Africa. Probably about 80%, I would guess. Don't quote me on those numbers. You guys can find out if you wanted to, but somewhere around that.
So you said that a lot of undergrads, black students, undergrads get their degree at HBCU,
Yeah.
and when they go to graduate programs, do you have any thoughts on what would be the important features of programs that successfully provide research opportunities for students coming from HBCUs
Yeah, that's a
to look
really
for a grad program?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So if I understand the question correctly, I think you're asking about, so you have these students that are coming from HBCUs and then they're transitioning to like majority white schools and
Correct, yeah.
right.
So what are the features of the programs to provide opportunities for these students?
Yeah, right. So that's an interesting question. I think that one of the primary differences is going to be in terms of tangible resources, material resources. So, some of our bigger schools, especially the private institutions, you know, the Ivy League schools, for example, you know, lots of material resources, a lot of material wealth. So for example, it's rare that an undergraduate student at an HBCU is going to be able to do a research project using something like a 2-photon microscope. Can happen, but it's rare. Or something that's very expensive, right? Like a very expensive, you know, piece of equipment. So the first benefit of that. So when I was undergrad, I actually did summer programs, and I went to University of Illinois Chicago was one of the programs that I went to. And so, you know, to get exposure to what it's like to do research at a R1 institution that has this level of resources that are, you know, have a lot of material resources. So there's that sort of advantage to give students exposure to that. But more important than that, I think it's about the networking opportunities, right? Because I think, as you all realize, to be successful in our business, you know, as scientists, it's really about the sort of connections that you can make, and being able to be part of teams that are doing science and these sorts of things. And so really it's about giving people the opportunity to benefit from the network that you have, right? That's probably more important than actually, you know, spending time on a fancy new technology or something like that. I think that the students that students that can come from these universities are often quite clever when it comes to figuring out how to do things in alternative methods, like at a cheaper scale. Like, how can we hack something else to repurpose something? How can we, what's another way to do it than the most expensive way, right? And that's, you know, it brings sort of a frugal mindset to things like, I see what we're trying to do, but there might be a cheaper way that we can do this. So that's one of the benefits. On the other side, I think that, for example, any postdocs or graduate students that might have an interest in teaching, I think that at large schools, I think it's difficult to get meaningful teaching experiences. I know when I was in grad school, I went to Duke. At Duke, there weren't any opportunities to, and I knew I wanted to teach, there weren't any opportunities to really teach a course because my PI only taught, you know, 5 lectures a year or something. Like, that didn't exist. I think Michigan has started to come up with some solutions for that. You know, I know that one of my students is in the teaching certificate, and you do get to TA a class and that sort of thing. And so, but my point being was that there are opportunities perhaps for students to find teaching opportunities at HBCUs, to go there and teach courses. When I was a faculty there, I used to have guest lecturers come from George Washington, which is a school nearby Howard University. I would have PhD students or postdocs that I knew. I would just say, hey, you want to come in and, you know, give a guest lecture on, you know, we're teaching the eye or the auditory system, whatever, and they would come in and give a guest lecture and help write some test questions, because it gave them an opportunity to put some teaching on their CVs when they were getting ready to go, you know, hunt for jobs and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, teaching opportunities can be very challenging sometimes, especially when you are in the med school.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So we received another question to talk about the HBCU.
Yeah.
And does having an HBCU on your resume make the landing job market more challenging? If yes, why or why not?
I think it depends. I think it depends. So in one situation where it could make it more challenging, like, you know, if you want to go to a very, if you're trying to get a position in a very technology heavy field, it can certainly hinder you if you don't have expertise, you know, with some equipment that you didn't have access to. So I guess the question is like a postdoc coming from an HBCU trying to get a faculty position. Is that the idea?
It was not specifically comment what would be the idea, but
okay.
I believe so.
Yeah, so in that situation, it could definitely, you know, that could definitely be a challenge. But if you're looking to go to a teaching university,
Right.
it can definitely be a benefit because they know you've had a lot of experience teaching in the classroom, teaching in laboratories. You've had experience working with diverse populations of students. So I guess it kind of depends on what the career objective might be.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we actually cover all the questions that were related to HBCUs and your professional experience working at HBCU and how they compare to our one institution. So if anyone from the crowd has some questions that you want to ask on the chat, or please unmute yourself. Otherwise, I will move to the second batch of questions that we have that are more related to career development and job search. So if someone has any question, please just interrupt me and say your questions. But we receive a lot of questions of postdocs asking for advice for postdocs that are thinking about transitioning to a faculty position, especially nowadays with all the challenges and everything.
Yeah.
So would you have some advice for postdocs that are thinking about to transition to a faculty position now?
Yeah, that's so many different things. And with the pandemic, my goodness, I feel so wow, I have so much empathy for anyone like who was planning to go on the job market right now because everything just ground to a halt. But the best thing, the first piece of advice I would say is find a mentor. Like this, you can't just get a faculty position by responding to an ad and filling out the thing. I mean, there's a lot of nuances to it. So, spend time thinking about what you want and be very, very honest with a mentor that can guide you, right? Find someone who's done that. Like this is not, you can't figure this out by yourself, particularly this particular part of your career. So, be very frank, like, talk to your mentor. Okay, I want to be at a position where I don't want to teach. I do not want to teach. I only want to run a lab. Then that's the kind of conversation you and your mentor can have, and you can start to filter through which positions are going to be right for you. And is this even the time? I mean, these positions are, is this even the time? I don't know what the average length of postdoc is right now, but a few years ago, it was typically around 6 years. People were doing, either 2 3-year postdocs or, 1 5 or 6 year postdoc. So your mentor can really give you an honest appraisal of whether or not, this is the right time in your career for it. I have more specific advice I'm going to give you, but that's the first thing I would say, because I don't have all the answers to that. Like my career trajectory was very, very convoluted. So, but that's my broad advice is, find someone you can confide in and be really honest with yourself and really honest with them. Do you really want that job that your PI is encouraging you to take? Because, it comes with a lot. Some more specific things. One of the books that I love right now, and I use it all the time, it's usually on my bookshelf, is this one. You guys probably seen this, by Kathy Barker, At the Helm. It's phenomenal. It's really good. It gives you hands-on practical advice. This one I keep right there. This other one I don't read so much, but it's at home in my home library. I don't read it as much. Every January I pull it out and figure out how I'm going to improve my lab. But this is a pretty good one too. Making the right moves. But I really like the Kathy Barker book because it gives practical advice, like how do you set up your lab on the first day? How often should you meet with your students? How do you protect your time? Those kinds of things. I should have followed more of it, but more and more I'm following more. After I've made all these mistakes, I'm going back and taking advice. The other thing I would say, probably the part that I didn't expect, is learn your soft skills. Like if you don't have really good people skills and you don't feel comfortable having frank conversations with people, and like if that kind of stuff makes you uncomfortable, work on that, because so much of this job is about that. And I didn't realize that. Like you think the job is about managing, the science and the projects. It kind of is, but to be honest, I'm at the bench, not as much as I would like to be. and that's okay. But most of my time is spent mentoring my graduate students. And so there was a question that one of the students asked, and it was about mentoring the graduate students. I think that's the most critical part of the job, because they're your boots on the ground. They're your hands at the bench. You know, you have these ideas, but you're not executing them, right? Your graduate students are executing them, or if you're fortunate, you know, your postdocs are executing them. And so you have to find out what makes them tick on a personal level. And that takes time. I think one of the mistakes I made in the beginning was not taking the time to build trust with the graduate students, right? You have to let them know that failure is okay. Like, it's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes. Like, whenever I bumble something in the lab, I let everybody know, oh man, you know what I did? I left out the primary. No wonder it didn't work. Like, that just relaxes the environment, and then it lets them feel like they can admit their shortcomings to you, because they're there. They have their insecurities. We all have things that we're bad at. And so in the beginning, I didn't do that. In the beginning, I tried to be very task oriented and say, okay, you need to do this by this date and this by that date. And I want it here, and it's 5 o'clock. And I told you on the 31st, you know, that doesn't work. That hasn't worked for me. Maybe it's just the group that I work with or something, but that hasn't worked for me. Instead, what works is trying to figure out how to inspire or how to motivate them, how to light that natural fire, you know, inside of them. And then I had to realize not everybody's like me. I'm a lab geek. There are a few places in the world that I prefer to be than in the lab. I mean, maybe at the beach or something. But if I don't have something to do, when I was a postdoc, if I didn't have something to do, I would be at the lab. Like, the lab is the most interesting place for me, because I'm a really lab geek. But part of that I realized, so when I opened up my lab, I thought that everyone would think like that, but they don't, and that's okay. And like, I had to learn to accept that. And then there's a difference between how times are different now and then. Like, you can get so much work done outside of the lab nowadays that you couldn't get done outside of the lab 10 years ago. So, you know, I had to relax that expectation. I apologize if I'm rambling, but what I want you to realize, if I can say one thing and let me sum it up, is that I think being successful is really about the soft skills. Like, you have to learn to relate to people, and that's something that I wasn't really good at, and I'm getting better. I'm trying to learn how to treat all the different people as individuals. You can't mentor everybody the same. I only had one speed, and I've had to learn to adapt for that. So.
Yeah, that's a really good advice. I kind of feel relief when my boss, he says he starts to tell the mistake he did as a postdoc. So it's a good feeling to think, oh, okay, it's okay to make mistakes. So I
Yeah.
think that it's definitely a good strategy. So still thinking about like this job search, what are the steps that postdocs or grad students should take to succeed in their job search? Or what are the qualities that are expected for a postdoc that is going to the job search? Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I do. I made a note about that. I don't think it's I don't have a magic piece of advice, but I mean, you know, it's hard out there. So publish, you know, your PI, I'm sure tells you that. Like, that's the name of the game for the most part. I'm assuming you're talking about getting a position at an R1 school where you're going to be research focused. Is that what you mean?
Um, so the questions were not really specific, but I'm
Okay.
assuming would be like R1 school.
Yeah.
I think if you
So,
want to go to more teaching, you would have to go towards getting teaching experience, right? So let's assume they're thinking about
right.
R1 school.
So in that case, I mean, I don't have a lot of it. I mean, I think it's the same thing that any PI would say. So, you know, publish as much as you can. Um, um, you can consider alternate paths to an R1 institution. Before the call started, we were talking about research a research assistant or a research professor track. That's a really interesting track for some people, right? So I think you guys know about these positions. They're becoming more common. They weren't very common when I was coming through. But you know, these are positions where you get to have a bit of autonomy. Sometimes you go with the budget. Sometimes, you know, when you're working under a PI, but you get to manage your own science. That's a brilliant step if you don't think that you're, you know, if the job search doesn't pan out the first time. Networking is really important. So many jobs I've heard about. It's just so many people getting jobs that I've heard about is really through word of mouth. When you're ready to go on the job market, tell your PI to tell everybody she knows. Get on Twitter. I mean, just tell everybody and have them and ask them to promote you. Like, it's so much better when the PI says, oh my God, I have this amazing postdoc. She's brilliant. And she's just about to go on the job market, right? I mean, that catches people's attention as opposed to, you know, some job searches, you get 400 applications and, you know, how do you stand out? Hopefully your PI, if you're fortunate enough to work with a PI that has connections, they can sometimes pick up the phone and say, hey, I see you guys have a job ad. You're looking for someone who does, you know, looking at cardiac, dysfunction. I have a great postdoc. He doesn't exactly do that, but here's what he does do, and he's really good. Is there any flexibility in this? Like, how constrained are these? Because when I was at Howard, for example, I have not been on a job search committee here, but I've been on a job search committee at Western University in both Howard. And I can tell you that when a good person comes along that doesn't fit the job description, if she's good, they will throw her name into the get an interview bunch anyway, because she's really excellent and it became clear. And the only reason that person applied is because one of their mentors might have called and said, how flexible are you guys in that position? So I don't like the idea. Some people give the advice of apply to everything. That's transparent. I think most committees can see through that. But what does work is if you find out, if you can have someone, or you call yourself, you call up and say, hey, I don't exactly fit that, but I'm great, I'm really good. It'd be better if you have someone else say it, but if not, toot your own horn. So I'm really good, I don't exactly fit that description, but here's what I can bring, and I think I might be able to fill that. So in other words, don't apply for everything, but the ones that you think you might really want, give them a heads up that your application is going to be different, but that it's coming, if that makes sense. You can call them before you send your application. I don't think it's such a good idea to call them after you've sent the application, but before you sent the application, you can call.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah. And one thing that, like, at least I think as a postdoc, I'm sure a lot of other postdocs feel the same. Let's say when we get a faculty position, you're going to sleep as a postdoc and wake up the next day as a faculty. And it's kind of a big change. So could you comment, how was that for you? Like, wake up as a faculty the next day, and what were the challenges that were faced as a new faculty?
Yeah, so it depends what your skill set is. So one of the things that I know that I'm bad at is I'm bad at starting from a blank page in anything. Like, I'm just, when I walk in. So first day, they give you the keys, you open up the door, and they're like, okay, what do you want to do? You want to knock out a wall? You want to add shelves? I'm like, I don't know. So what you can do is, once you find out you're getting a faculty position, network your butt off. Call everyone in the department, start reaching out to people and asking them how to navigate the system. Michigan has a really difficult internal system. Like, it's very different than the one I came from. So just the way that the administration is set up, like the way that you interact with, like, how do you order things? The way that we order things was very different than other places I've been. And so getting a buddy, like, hit the ground running, get a buddy, get someone on the faculty who can help you. Like, for example, you have to submit your annual protocols. As soon as you accept that job position, say, hey, I'm working with rats. Who has a rat protocol that I can use as a template? Because you don't want to start de novo, right? At Michigan, we have a lot of different, safety precaution you have to do. So there's there's your IBC protocol and your chemical protocol. So all of these things take up a lot of administrative time. So you can get templates from someone who's already been there and done that and already submitted it and gotten that protocol approved, and you can use it as a template. That will save you a lot of time. What else? What other sorts of advice? Oh, one of the best things that happened for me was that I was able to bring a graduate student with me from Howard, and that was phenomenal. She's awesome. And so, we walk in the door and she's very well organized. Like, one of her strengths is she's an amazing organized person. So it was awesome having her. I'm like, okay, here we go. It's all white walls and empty shelves. Let's go. And we started ordering things and building things. And then once another graduate student joined, they also pitched in. And so I think it was good for them to see that from their perspective, like joining a lab that's, basically just gotten the keys to the building and building from scratch. I think that was an interesting experience for them. Get help, ask for help. Hopefully you have a really supportive kind of chair or sometimes they have like a faculty liaison at different schools. But anyway, whoever it is that works with junior faculty, don't be afraid to ask for help. Just because you got the job, they're not expecting you to know everything. They're not expecting you to come through the door and start going after your Nobel Prize. I mean, if you can, do so, but if not, that's okay. It's okay to say, I'm not sure, I don't understand this, how does it work? Because I think at a place like Michigan, a really big place like Michigan, the culture is very, it's very different than the sort of, than some places. You guys are going to be fine because you're at Michigan, so there's no place bigger than Michigan. So you're not going to have, there's no place that has more levels of administration and bureaucracy than Michigan, I don't think. I can't imagine. So you guys are going to be fine. If you learn to navigate Michigan's administrative levels and different, silos, you'll be fine to go any place else. But definitely ask somebody when you get there for help. That probably wasn't very useful, but ask me another question, maybe a more directed question. I can maybe give you a more directed.
No, it was definitely very useful. And at the end, it seems like it's always good to have a mentor, right? Doesn't matter which phase you are at your life, if you're a grad student, a postdoc, or new faculty. It's always good to have someone with more experience to help you, right?
Dr. Subramanian just posted a really interesting thing in the chat. Yes, there are 2 public Slack groups. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, we're fortunate because of all these kind of technological things we have, and now everybody's used to Zoom. You're going to feel isolated as an EPI. You're going to feel lonely. It's lonely in the beginning. It really is. So I think these are great to stay in touch with people and meet new people. But yeah, it's definitely a little bit lonely in the beginning.
Yeah, other question that we received was about how you balance work and home responsibility while still making research. So you comment you have 2 kids, right? And how do you balance work and research and everything?
I'm not the best person at balancing work and research. I'm in the lab 6 days a week. Try not to be 7, but I'm in the lab all the time. So in the beginning, what I realized is, gosh, I was probably, in the beginning when my kids were little, when I was a postdoc, I was able to be absent. I was able to just be in the lab and grind things out because they weren't aware. Like little kids, they sleep all the time. Like they didn't realize daddy's gone. As they got older and they started to, they started to want to spend more time, then the real struggle became because, you got this gel you're wearing or whatever, want to spend time with your kid. Nowadays, what I've done is I schedule in things that make sure I spend time with them. For example, my kids play football. So I volunteer, I'm a volunteer coach for his team. I like football, but not so much that I'm passionate about football, but then I know I am going to be there and spending time with him at least 3 times a week for an hour and a half. I'm guaranteed to be there. So because the thing that I found is that this job, especially as a new professor, it will consume every waking moment, unless like I said, unless I have something to do, I'm usually in the lab. So what I do is I schedule things so that to make sure that I spend enough time with my sons. I don't know if that's maybe sad, but but when I'm with them, I'm 100% engaged, have all my attention. And so my kids have kind of learned that, dad is not going to sit on the couch and watch cartoons with me. He's not going to sit on, like we don't spend random time together. When we spend time together, it's because we decided we're going to do a thing and we're all in and we have a good time and it's fun. And then I have dinner with them and then I go back to the lab or I go to my office and I get back to work. So for me, that works. My spouse, my wife is incredibly generous, incredibly generous. She knows the demands of this and we've been together a very long time. And so she understands. And I'm like, I got a grant deadline. I'm not coming home tonight. Like I'm going to be here till 1 o'clock. So, she gets that. But then on the other side, we went on a 10-day vacation a couple years ago. Like I was just completely gone. So there's that flexibility in it. When for me, scheduling works. That's my solution. It's just, I tell them I can do anything, but I can do anything with enough lead time, but I can't do anything spontaneous. Spontaneity is the antithesis for me. My kid broke his foot a couple months ago and I had to stop everything and run to the hospital and he turned out to be okay. And I was there and did all that stuff. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking there's 4 things left on my to-do list that I got to get done that I can't do, because I got to deal with this emergency. Oh, the other thing. So all the little soccer games you have to go through as a parent and the recitals and stuff. Your kids are, my kids, they want me to be there, but they don't know whether or not I'm really watching them kick the ball the wrong direction, or make a horrible saxophone recital. So bring something to read with you. Go to the recital, go there, be a good mom, be a good dad, show up. But during halftime, I go to the car and I'm deleting emails or, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I haven't managed this good work-life balance and I don't have them fully segregated. And then with COVID time, it's even worse. Things are fully integrated. So COVID has really made things worse. But for me, I think what you have to do is pick the things that are important to you and just realize you can't do everything in this job. If you're gonna run a lab, you're not gonna be able to make every single basketball practice and all the game, just I can anyway. You guys might be able to, but I haven't been able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's difficult for everyone.
There's a bit of a sacrifice to being running a lab for sure. There's a bit of a sacrifice involved. But it's worth it.
For sure. So we have one last question, and please, if everyone has questions, feel free to unmute yourself and send on the chat. But the last question is like, did you always knew that you want to become an academic professor? And what was the deciding factor for you? I think you comment a little bit that you were a instructor before, but did you always knew want to stay in academia?
Yeah, I always wanted to teach for a long time. I love teaching. But the other thing that I've always enjoyed is I just enjoy trying to solve puzzles, right? That's really it at the end of the day for me. I just really enjoy trying to solve puzzles. Like there's something there and I enjoy trying to figure out how it works. Fortunately, it's not necessarily just the success of solving the puzzle that I get that I enjoy. I enjoy the process. I enjoy, the fail. I don't enjoy failed experiment. Well, it's just part of it. Like you get used to it, right? Like you get used to the fact that 90% of your experiments are going to fail. But I actually enjoy that iterative process of trying something and then going back, trying something again. So I think that's really, enjoying that is really good for a researcher, but that's not the only thing you can do if you enjoy that. I think I just discovered science before I discovered something like engineering, because I could see myself being an engineer as well, but I just discovered basic research science before I knew anything about engineering. It checks a lot of the boxes for what gives me satisfaction professionally. And basically it's chasing the solution for a puzzle. I really enjoy that.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And does anyone have another question or want to make some comment or chat with
I just
Kevin?
found my notes about being, one more thing that I wanted to say about
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. I realized one of the things that I did very early once I first got so when you go from being a postdoc to a PI, it's the biggest salary increase you're ever going to have in your life. It never gets, I mean, your salary almost doubles, right? Almost. So first thing I did was all those things that take up time that you don't enjoy doing them, pay someone else to do them. Right. So for the first couple of years when I lived in Washington, D.C., I didn't do my own. I hate doing laundry. I didn't do my laundry. I dropped it off at the laundromat, wash and fold. It costs money, but I have more money than time. So do that. Cutting the grass, washing my car, any of those cleaning your house. Right. If you order food, like, you're only going to have a limited number of hours. And so one piece of advice I got was, what's the word she used? One of my mentors told me, what is it called when you hire, farm out. She said, farm out all the stuff that you don't enjoy doing and just pay money, farm it out. Have someone cook your food if you don't enjoy that, have someone fold your clothes, like just do all that because you have more time than money ever in your life. And you'll never, yeah. So that is one thing that was helpful.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, does anyone have any other questions for Kevin or any comments?
Hi, Dr. Jones. This is Emily Yarrows. I'm actually a graduate student, not a postdoc, so I'm kind of looking at going to postdocs right now. And I thought it was really interesting in the beginning of your talk when you said that you went abroad for a postdoc. Do you recommend doing that?
Okay,
and
so
what did you do to? Second part. What did you do to kind of network for that?
That's the key. That's the thing. That's the challenge with doing a postdoc abroad, right? You're going to come back to America. You're going to come back to the American system, and Americans are going to be reviewing your grants. And if you haven't networked with people, so the challenge is, I think it's easier to overcome that challenge now because you know yourself, it's the networking part. So plan your return before you leave. I would say, if you were going to do that, I would say identify who you're going to work with abroad and identify who you're going to work with when you return and connect those two people and sort of pitch them on the idea that I'm going to build a collaboration between your two labs and I'm going to be the conduit for that. I'm going to be the bridge. So I'm going to go over here and start something, and then I'm going to bring it back to America to keep this thing going. I think that would make your return, I think that would make it more seamless. And I think that would probably be the way to really make sure you don't delay your career progression, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you so much for the advice and for this whole talk. Everything you said was very helpful. So thanks
thank you.
for taking the time to do this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. I'm glad it was helpful.
Well, yeah, I think if we don't have more questions, thank you very much. That was really great, Kevin.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine. The pleasure was all mine. You guys are inspiring. You guys are doing so many interesting, cool things. It invigorates me to spend time with postdocs. So thank you.
Thank you. It was great. And thank you everyone for
inviting me, Shoba. Thank you for the invitation, Shoba.
Of course, yeah, this was long overdue, and I'm so glad that the calendars worked out and we could actually do it. And I almost want to do like a part 2 because you had so many nuggets of wisdom that we can expand on around like time management and, different mentoring styles and, so many other good stuff. So we'll be in touch.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
okay,
course, yeah.
Best of luck to all of you. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Everybody join me in thanking Dr. Jones and Dr. Silviera.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. I appreciate it.
No, thank you, Kevin. It was very nice to meet you.
And if you have a moment, I put a link to a feedback survey. It's anonymous. It helps us improve. Please take a minute to fill out our survey. And thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Shubha. I see you.
Thanks, Marina. This was great. Yeah.
Thank you. See you Wednesday.
Yeah. See you Wednesday. Bye.
Bye.